So post-normal means we're in some pretty we can develop that. I feel like we're in some pretty crazy times right now. So this British Pakistani scholar Zaidin Sardar refers to our time as an interim period where an old era has ended. That would be the liberal international order, so forth, and a new era has yet to fully emerge and reestablish itself. So we're in kind of this, Gramsci would call it an interregnum period. It's really crazy and it's really weird. But during this post-normal period, there's still a lag. We still have the institutions that dominated the old era flexing their muscles institutionally, but everyone has a sense that they don't mean this. They don't carry the same authority that they used to. Certainly Russia called that bluff with the invasion of Ukraine. They were told in no uncertain terms by the whole of the West, you do that, we'll cut you off from every single financial structure you have with us. And Putin said, big deal. I'm hanging out with Xi. I'm going east. Never mind. And so we just don't control the world like we used to. We're moving from a unipolar world to what's called a multipolar world, where you have multiple poles of power. And that's just dramatically changing everything.
Yeah. And one of the ways that you diverge, I'd say, from the typical sort of neocon conservative politics is that you're not necessarily too upset about this new multipolar world that we're seeing. Whereas a lot of people, they will demonize China, they'll demonize Russia, they'll demonize Iran and all of these countries and think that they're just all bad. And they'll be, ruining the fact that America can't wield power. And this is the sort of typical neocon politics. So tell me a little bit about how you think you diverge from these sorts of strains of thought and what the new conservative movement is that you're predicting.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's very, very accurate. Yeah, I have no time, no patience for the neocon. We're seeing the world reconfigure very much akin to the way Sam Huntington was arguing in the 1990s, right at the same time that Fukuyama was arguing we were entering into the end of history. We finally found the one political and economic system that all nations can turn to, liberal democracy and so forth, and liberal corporations and all. We're all going that direction. Sam Huntington at the same time said, no, we're not. That's not the world that's rising. He saw what was happening then in the old Yugoslavia as more paradigmatic of what's happening in the world. Now, he often gets, I think, unfairly tarnished for being for thinking that war is going to be just the ongoing reality. That's not what he meant. What he meant was all the conflicts that we're going to be experiencing over the course of the 21st century are all going to involve regions where incommensurate civilizations overlap. Now, again, modernity didn't care about civilization. It didn't care about religion. It didn't care about any of these things. All it cared about were scientific protocols, political and economic protocols that could be superimposed upon any country, regardless of your culture. It's radical because all cultures prior to that always believed that our politics and our economy are downstream for culture. And as cultural anthropologists would tell us, that's exactly right. But that was the air we were breathing. We believe we could superimpose an Enlightenment-based, secularized vision of the world on all nations. And what Sam Huntington said is that experiment is dead. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, that's just a precursor of what's going to happen to the U.S.-led unipolar order. That's going to collapse because it's built on the exact same premises, the exact same assumptions that not transcultural protocols, political and economic protocols, can provide a common politics around the world. That's rooted in modernity, and modernity is collapsing. We're now in a postmodern world where the very doubt and skepticism that science would have applied to, say, faith and religion is now being applied to science. It's literally come full circle. And so postmodernists are basically saying the only way you can know, the only way you can have any kind of ethic ultimately is rooted in culture. And so now the world is breaking apart from these globalist structures and moving back to nation, culture, custom, and traditions, doing it in all kinds of different ways.
Guys, huge announcement. If you didn't know, the Reality Based podcast is moving up in the world and now has its very own YouTube channel, its own home, where we're going to be uploading all of the full episodes from the past, and in the future, all of the full episodes will be going on this YouTube channel, as well as many different clips for those of you who enjoy the more bite-sized videos. So I'm going to leave the links to that below, as well as the link to Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you prefer your podcasts in audio form. Let's get back to it.
But the main thing that's really happening, it's really awesome, something I don't know how many of us, Sam Huntington seemed to see it, is we're seeing the return of civilizations, the great civilizations of past. I like to say, like in kaiju-like fashion, just are rising up from the depths below in all of their splendor. Orthodox Russia, Confucian China, Hindu nationalist India, Shinto Japan, where my wife is from, and I've gotten to see firsthand, Ottoman Turkey, continental Africa, Shiite Persia. And yes, a new right, a very Christian-oriented right. Just listen to Geert Wilders, who's an atheist, but turns around and says that Christianity is the bulwark for European civilization that he will defend. Even a renewed Christian civilization in Europe and the United States. So this is a stunning civilizationalist turn. And basically what more and more these populations are asking is, if we didn't make that modernist turn, fill in the blank, 30 years ago, 70 years ago, whenever it was that we adopted all of these, scientific-based, supposedly value-neutral based politics and economics that ended up giving us wokeness, ironically. If we could go back to before we started adopting this, go back to that religious world that we left, what would it be like if we picked up from there? What would it be like if Russia actually rebuilt 40,000 Orthodox churches that were smashed and destroyed during the time of communism? What if we brought that back? What if we had almost like a czar-like figure who had virtually unlimited power as president, working together with a revivified Orthodox church? What would Russia look like today? That's the way civilizationalist thinking is happening. You're seeing it with President Xi and building all of these Confucian institutes all throughout the Politburo, the Communist Party. It tends to be a very elite kind of Confucianism, where Marx is being absorbed into much more ancient thinking. You're seeing it coming back. Shinto, remember, Shinto was on the outs in Japan for like a decade or two. It was blamed for the disaster of World War II. Shinto is more popular today than it's ever been. And again, it gives this sense of harmony and unity to a distinctively Japanese civilization. We're seeing it in the Middle East. We're seeing it in Africa, kicking out the French colonialists, you name it. It's happening all over the world, where there's this revivified civilizationalism that's happening, where more and more populations are returning to their, frankly, ancient roots as a way forward in a post-modern, post-secular world.
So I think that one of the interesting parts about this is that your view on this is that that is the conservative position to take, is to be supporting these civilizations rising up around the world. But a lot of people would criticize you and say that that's anti-American, because you're in a way celebrating the downfall of the American liberal democratic system. So how would you respond to that claim?
It's a good question. Yeah, I would have to plead guilty to that. I'm not a big fan of the American liberal. Remember, so America's always had this interesting schizophrenic. It's always had this personality disorder. We started as a thoroughly theocratic experiment, right? We Puritans came over from the British Isles and started a new Jerusalem. That was the purpose of America. So all of our original colonies were basically theocracies. Again, it's around the Enlightenment period, so there's going to be all these. Jonathan Edwards would be a very good example of that. I actually grew up not too far away from where he was born, in the Hartford area in Connecticut. But he would be a good example of an Enlightenment-oriented Puritan, for example. We really were a nation that sought, or a colonial experiment that sought to realize a Puritan vision of the world that appeared very frustrated post Cromwell and the resilience of the crown in the British Isles. At the same time, the Enlightenment is happening in the 18th century, and we're on the forefront of the latest philosophical movements that are coming out of Europe, and it becomes very, very popular here among our intellectuals. So we've always had this kind of strange tension between a very robust conservative Christianity on the one hand, and yet an equally robust inquisitive scientism on the other. And we're still trying to figure out how those, I happen to think they fit perfectly. We're seeing that in Russia, for example. We're seeing that in Japan with their own traditions. But nevertheless, we're still trying to see how those fit together, as it were. But what clearly happened, and I like the theorist Peturum Sorokin. He's a Russian-American, founded the sociology department, I believe, at Harvard. But he made a very, or Yale, I forget. He made a very good. He had a very good analysis of what he called sensate culture, and sensate culture is a culture that goes like fully secular. He believed all cultures were rooted in the sacred. So all cultures are rooted in a cult. A cult is a sacred form of worship that tends to be very specific to that culture. It blossoms into all of this beautiful literature, art, architecture, music, poetry, politics, economics, family, household, fashion, you name calendar. It blossoms into culture. And then there's always going to be a secular part to this what he called the sensate part to this vision of the world, because you still got to figure out, okay, how do you cook? How do you stay warm during winter? How do how much wood do you need? There's just basic secular worldly concerns in the midst of these what he called ideational sacred concerns. But he noticed over history that oftentimes, if not always, the secular can take over, what he called the sensate. It could take over, and so much so, it becomes exclusive in the way it knows and the way it conducts itself and imagines reality, and sort of pushes the sacred out. The problem is, once the secular has done that, it has amputated itself from the eternal resuscitating roots of the sacred. And so it ends up just withering. But when it withers, this is Sorokin, when it withers, it ends up functioning more like a compost pile that reignites the sacred seeds again. And so all of a sudden, then an idealistic world, a thoroughly religious world emerges. So what I see in many respects is a liberal international order that was thoroughly and fully secularized is kind of going through that process of basically becoming compost. It's rotting. It's falling apart. We all get it. We all see it. Nobody wants to die for this thing anymore. That's for sure. That's certainly what we're getting here. But in its place, something else is rising. And what is rising, ironically, is this renewed sense of the sacred. And so looks like we may be going through an ideational world again. That's certainly what happened in Russia, where the church basically sees itself, the Orthodox Church there, as an embodiment of Christ's resurrection from the tomb of 70 years of communism. And it was a perfect Sabbath of communism that then gave birth, a new birth, to a new Russian orthodoxy. So it's fascinating stuff. China's talking the same way. India's talking very much the same way. A whole new aeon is emerging in Hindu philosophy and theology. The Kali Yuga is coming to an end, an age of humiliation and destruction,
Right.
and the Sat Yuga is rising with the BJP party, of course, coming to power and the like. And now we're seeing that with the way even someone like Erdogan has restructured Turkey. 40 years ago, Turkey was your ideal secular society in the Islamic world. Now they've turned the Hagia Sophia back into a mosque. So they're going full, nationalist, populist traditionalism. That's very indicative of a world order where the old modernist secular paradigm is basically crumbling, and a new and that's functioning as the compost that's reigniting the seeds of much more of a traditionalist world. So it's not even, for me, it's not even a matter of should we keep the liberal world order or not. It's going whether we like it or not. And I'm just, So that's, I try to be as descriptive as possible rather than prescriptive, saying, to hell with that liberal world order, get rid of it. Granted, I'll do that to the extent that Biden, for example, embodies that order. But in the end, I believe it's happening regardless of whether we support it or not. And now it's just a matter of trying to understand what are the dynamics behind it.